All right, welcome back, everybody. I took a quick look at some of the attendees. We got a great turnout all across Ontario. I see some cool friends here and people I haven't seen at trade shows for 2 years. Matt Dodson and Mark Piccolo, Keith Bartlett, welcome back to being a superintendent. Jennifer Pendrith. I see Eric Roos from Eastern Ontario. Good to have Eric still around, and Brad Bell. And we'll do a few shout outs to a few other people as we go along here. Our next speaker is David Simm. David is president of the Arbordale Group of Companies. They're based in Mount Albert here in Ontario. And Dave's got over 30 years of landscape and water management experience. He's got his degree, honors degree from Lakehead University. And he also has received his LEED AP certification as water conservation specialist. Member of several associations, and he served on the Provincial Education Minister's Apprenticeship Advisory Board for National Irrigation. David's, needless to say, an expert in water quality, and we're happy to be working with him for the last couple of years with several product lines. So David's talk today is the opportunity and necessity for irrigation water source remediation. And welcome, David. Look forward to hearing you speak this morning.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Just to make sure my microphone's working.
Everything sounds great.
Fantastic, and the screen is visible.
Yes, you're all good to go.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Really neat to hear some of those names. As some of you may be aware, I spent quite a bit of time in the golf industry, and some of the names that Nigel just mentioned are people I haven't seen in a number of years, and look forward to seeing when we get back to getting in person. But thank you to AllTurf. We're going to talk about ponds. We're going to talk about water management, water quality management. So we're moving from Ben's topic on dealing with the turf into something I think is equally as important. I do these presentations quite regularly, and I do them across Canada and into the northeastern United States. And I have found that one of the few things that unites everyone is a true disdain for the Leafs. So if I throw up one of those slides, it kind of makes everybody understand that I'm with them and I'm not just a guy from the city. And then we get to launch into water. Why is water so important? Well, it is absolutely your number, to recap, it's your number one input by volume. It is an essential nutrient. And the important thing, and what we're going to focus on today, is that it interacts with all of your other inputs. And water, regardless of its source, it's unlikely that you're taking your spray water from your pond or your dugout, but that water makes up 95% plus of your spray mix. It may be and can be the deciding factor whether your products work the way they're supposed to and whether they work the way you intend them. So we have to be concerned about water, and we want to take a closer look at the things that are going on there. Water's been well examined. It's not really well understood, believe it or not, but it's been well examined, particularly in the turf and the agricultural industry. Lots of great publications out there. This one's out of Purdue, and it's a pretty good one that you can probably pick up. Water quality issues in turf grass. That one's a good publication. It really drills into the minutia. But again, it's a really good text. And there are a couple of others, water quality irrigated agriculture. That one's probably the Bible, the turf grass and landscape irrigation water quality assessment and management. We refer to that one daily. So if you're looking for, it is dry, no pun intended, I mean, despite the subject matter, it is dry, but there's some really valuable information there to help define the relationship, help you understand that relationship, and help you manage that relationship between all of your other inputs and your water. Great quote out of the Purdue study that I really think sets the tone, that water is viewed as relatively clean input. If it runs clear, we don't give much thought to its purity. In our business, we work in water across a number of different applications, and livestock is another one. And we spend a lot of time on livestock water, and one of their great contentions is probably the same as it is in turf. I don't pay for it, so I don't pay much mind to it until it becomes a problem. So The key findings in a lot of those, in all of those publications, really boil down to a couple of things. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about pH. We're concerned about organic/mineral material, which is dissolved minerals and organic material. We're concerned about the hardness and the iron, which are directly related to mineral content. And then we're concerned about nutrient loading. If we get a hold of those, really, what are those three things, organics, minerals, and hardness being similar, if you can get a hold and get an understanding of those three things, then you can manage your water quality properly. And the research shows without a doubt in all of those publications that the quality of water used for spraying and irrigation, and it's not just irrigation, but it is spraying and irrigation, can affect how those controlled products perform. So poor water quality can adversely affect the products that you're spraying. It also has to do with how well that product is absorbed, what's in the water that can affect the products that you're applying. And again, that reduction may not be obvious, but if you're not getting what you expect out of your inputs, and if you're not getting the performance you expect out of those applications, the water's worth a look. I would argue that the water is worth a look straight off the hop. And when we say it's worth a look, what are we talking about? From our standpoint, we're talking about testing. Need to test the water. We need to understand what we're working with. You need to understand what you're working with so that you can take it from there. So of those four categories, just a little background information. pH. pH is a measure of the acidity or lack thereof of your water. You'll notice in the middle of that chart, 7 is neutral. 7 as a neutral is really a theoretical neutral. Rainfall is never a 7. Rainfall is often somewhere in that 5.8, 5.9. That's what we generally, if we have to pick a number for rainfall when we're doing calculations, then we're picking a 5.7, a 5.8, a 5.9. There'll be people here today who aren't old enough to remember acid rain. Acid rain was a product of pollutants in the atmosphere from the Ohio Valley. They'd enter the atmosphere, water molecules would form, the rain would fall, and they'd pull some of those acidic pollutants out of the atmosphere with them, and it would fall. That acid rain was falling as a 4.9 or a 5, and it fell on the bulk of Ontario, predominantly slightly north of the GTA. But the way the weather patterns flowed, that's where the acid rain fell. Not joking, the way they solved acid rain was to make the smokestacks taller so the pollutants would travel farther. But, well, and then of course, the death of the Ohio manufacturing industry. But the important point here is that for most manufactured products, they're shooting for, or they're looking for, a pH range that's right there in that middle. Something in a 6 to an 8 makes most products really happy. Difficult in Ontario to understand how you'd be sort of south of 6 by much or north of 8 by much, but that's what we're shooting for. Biggest effector of pH in Ontario is limestone. That's a limestone map throughout of the southern Ontario region, anyway. And you can see it moves in strata. Limestone, as it presents itself in the groundwater, as water percolates through the soil, it picks up those minerals. Depends on the composition of the limestone, whether it's dolomitic lime or it's regular lime, but limestone's the biggest effector of pH. To give you some idea, there are label warnings on some of the products that you're using today that talk very specifically about pH. Some that say do not buffer, don't spray anything below 5 or above 8. There's another one, 6 to 8. There's actually a product out there that says don't buffer the pH because the buffer products can affect the inputs themselves. So understanding what your pH is important. Dissolved minerals. Doesn't matter where your water source is. Even, believe it or not, reverse osmosis. If you've got a reverse osmosis system, you're still going to have measurable amounts of some minerals in your water. All water sources in nature contain dissolved minerals. It's just the way it is. Every well and every surface source is different because the dissolved mineral content is based upon your soil type, based upon if it's surface water, it's runoff. If it's well water, it's what's your soil composition look like? What does your underlying mineral content look like? How deep is your aquifer? If you're into old water, if you're down several hundred feet and you're down into what we refer to as ancient water, then your mineral content is going to be very different than water that's up in an aquifer at, say, 30 feet, 40 feet. Dissolved minerals that we care about in the turf industry really come down to calciums, magnesiums, and iron. Those are the ones that are most likely to cause issues with your physical structures, your pipes, your irrigation delivery systems. They're the ones that are going to, that can, depending on what you put in the water, precipitate out, but they do not on their own settle out. So as a mineral dissolved in water, it stays. The reasons those can be a problem is the magnesium, calcium, and iron carry a positive charge. They're naturally magnetic. And most liquids, just by their very physical nature, are negatively charged. So if you're using water with high iron content, magnesium, and calcium, you can see interactions with the products you're using. It's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. That's a worst case scenario, of course, is causing your product to precipitate out of solution. But prior to that happening, there are all kinds of levels where dissolved minerals in particular can bind with elements in your delivery products and cause them to either to be too large to enter the target organism, to develop an outer surface that makes them incompatible with the target organisms you're trying to address. Even on the fertility side, you can see dissolved minerals. There's a manganese that will actually bind and prevent fertility products from entering into the organism or into the plant itself. So that's worst case scenario, but it absolutely can happen. In Ontario, we don't worry quite so much about sodium and calcium. There are places out west that worry about it. Obviously, in the United States, they worry about it quite a bit. It's very different than hard water. Sodiums and calciums are saline. But again, here in Ontario, in our target, there are seasonal issues, particularly for those people dealing with road salt. That's not a chronic issue. However, if you're in an off-flow or runoff area and you start to build, year after year after year, the salinity of your spring runoff water is quite high. You can build salinity in your outdoor water storages, so it's something to keep an eye on. And most particularly, if you deal in anything that has anything to do with drip or fertigation, salinity is a real serious issue. And in Ontario, down in Niagara, we can actually see salinity issues if you're dealing with those much smaller irrigation applications. And then there's the marriage of those two things, the pH issues that we talked about and the presence of dissolved minerals. Acidity and dissolved minerals can interact with each other and then with the active ingredients. So think of this much the same way as that pH activity chart that you've all seen, how the activity and availability of various macros and micros will fluctuate based on the pH of the water or the pH of the soil. The same thing applies. As the pH rises and falls, you'll see different attractions and different bindings of those micronutrients. And again, forewarned is forearmed, which is why we test. Organic material. This is the one that a lot of people get tripped up on. Organic material in the water. Both of those are suspended organics, even though the one on the right looks simply like turbidity or suspended soil particles. Those are both suspended organics. So the one on the left happens to be planktonic algae. And the one on the right happens to be a form of soil organics, but they are both suspended organics. Given enough time, the planktonic algae on the left will not precipitate out. It's a living organism, and it's going to thrive and survive and photosynthesize. Given enough time, the suspended particles on the right could precipitate out, but we don't know unless we test. But we run across that quite a bit. Suspended soils and suspended organic material are all positively charged. So the inputs are attracted, they bind, and off you go. So that's why so it's an issue. Some products bind to suspended sediments. Some of your input products will actually bind to sediments. If you think about some of your inputs, they're actually designed to bind to soils. So they'll actually bind to the sediments in your water. And that's the last thing in the world you need, because then you won't get the plant uptake you're looking for. Straight off the label of one of your plant one of your plant products, product performance may be significantly reduced if water-containing soil sediment is used as a carrier. So, organic material, a little bit of the minutiae. All of the inputs that you use have indexes called KD and KOC. And KD and KOC are soil absorption coefficient and soil organic carbon absorption coefficient. Probably not something you need to worry about on a day-to-day. But again, if you find yourself in a place where you've tested your water and you're high in organics, or you're high in TDS, total dissolved solids, if you're high in some of the minerals, then you're going to want to do something about the water, because those inputs have the absorption coefficients will tell you how affected those inputs are going to be by your water quality, and it does bind. And KD and KOT values indicate how tightly those products will bind to the molecules in your water, or to the additions in your water. And more sediment, more organic material, more minerals means less input available. So organic material, minerals are fairly straightforward. Again, they come through soil precipitation, soil infiltration through the water or through the soil. Some minerals can actually be atmospheric and brought to us that way. Organic material is fairly straightforward. It's obviously terrestrial, and it's coming to you predominantly through runoff and predominantly through plants around the marge of your pond. But it also comes from other places. This is a lined pond, 4.5 million gallons in Western Ontario, and that's their intake. They intake into their lined dugout from the local irrigation district, and that's the quality of the water that they're pumping into their dugout. So they're bringing the organics with them. You see thriving algae and straw and all sorts of stuff on the input. Organic inputs can come from reclaimed water. If you're using any kind of gray water, any kind of reclaimed water, and that's not a commentary on the quality of the treatment that it goes through. It's simply unavoidable. There isn't a standard on the planet for drinking water that eliminates all organic material. So certainly not for gray water. So if you're using gray water or recycled water, you're going to be heavy in organics. Some people laugh at this. Mostly it's people not in the turf industry who laugh at that picture. But you've seen how much organic material one goose can put out in 5 minutes on a golf green. And if you think about 300 geese in your pond overnight, or you think about all of the other environmental organics that you can be seeing. If you have bulrushes growing on the side of your pond, they're doing a fantastic job all summer long of extracting nutrients from the water. They've got a nice rooted tuber, they're in the soil, they're pulling in nutrients, they're photosynthesizing like little demons, and they're actually helping to clean and clarify the water. And then fall comes along and they die and they fall over and they put all of that organic material, plus some of the energy that they've actually photosynthesized, they put that back into the pond. So it's an absolute net loss. They'll put back more organic material and more nutrients into the pond than they will extract during their lifetime. This is an extreme example. Obviously, this is High River from 10 years ago. But we're seeing more and more surface intrusion. Now, none of the pictures I'm using are from Ontario, so I don't want anybody to feel bad. But Kelowna Golf Club, Kelowna as a city itself, regular flooding, golf courses are getting regular flooding. It's obviously a rare event, but anything like this brings in massive amounts of organics. Your spring runoff brings massive amounts of organics into your ponds and into your environment. And those organics all fall to the bottom of the pond and fall to the bottom of the water source and create your sediment. And sediment is really the enemy here, because sediment in your water source is what's harboring all of the bad stuff. So we talked about testing. How are you going to test? You've got a couple of options. Test strips are generally fine. Couple of tips: make sure they're not expired. Test strips do expire, and generally their shelf life is about 2 years. And test strips will give you they're not going to be off by, on pH, they're not going to be off by more than half a point, probably, if they're from a reputable organization and they're not expired. Test strips are fine for pH. Test strips are fine for some minerals, magnesiums, irons, nitrites, nitrates. Test strips can work. Jar test works really well for sediments, for salt, for total dissolved solids, for organic material, to help determine whether it's going to settle out, whether it's simply or whether it's an actual suspended or dissolved solid. Test strip works really well. Lab test is the absolute best way to go. They don't have to be expensive. Here in Ontario, you can get a comprehensive surface water or tap water or well water test for right around $100. And if you do that once a year, because your water changes, even if you're in a well and even if you're in a deep well, we see fluctuations in that water quality. If you're down several hundred feet, it may not happen every week, and it certainly won't happen every week, but a water test once a year will confirm what you're looking at. If you're in a shallow well, if you're less than 100 feet deep, or if you're pulling from surface water, I'd be taking a water test at the beginning of every season, at the very least, because then you've got a benchmark and you'll see how those fluctuations change. So why do we do it? Because there isn't a pond in the world that'll look after itself. They're all in a state of transition. They're all in a state of change, and everyone is unique unto itself. And the uniqueness starts with soil composition, fertilizer runoff. I mean, do you have buffer zones? Do you have, and I know buffer zones are a big bone of contention, because there probably isn't a member on your course who wants to see a 3-meter unmowed marge around every pond. But we all know that's the best way to stop surface runoff. The sludge accumulation, just your climate. How much tree cover do you have? How much shade do you have? How much direct sunlight are you getting? And what have you done to the pond, or what have previous people done to the pond in the past? All of those things play into effect, and all of those things come into play when you're talking about managing the pond itself. So first and foremost, and again, it comes back to the soil test, to the water test, you need to identify the causes. We need to identify exactly what's going on in there. Everyone is unique. And what we're trying to achieve here is balance. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're looking for a balance where everything's healthy, where everything is still alive, and the pond that water is useful. Because if you think about, maybe this doesn't apply to you because you're on municipal water, or you've got a great water system, and everything that goes into your tank is crystal clear and clean. But what about the irrigation water that follows it up? Your irrigation water absolutely impacts the products that you put down. Yes, you wait, but what about those products you have to water in? So that's why we focus on water quality, and you're looking for that balance. Anyway, that pond's a good one. That one's got filamentous algae. It's got, they've actually put some pond dye in it, and it's got rooted weeds. So the primary causes of water problems, we've already started to drill into them, but in a nutshell, they are light, temperature, nutrients. If you got those three, you're going to have water issues. And by water issues, generally we'll describe those as algae, rooted weeds, and insects, harmful insects. But light, temperature, nutrients, that's it. If you've got those three, that's what you're going to get. Here's a perfect example of light, temperature, nutrients. This is actually a really northern turf facility. It's not a golf course, but this is a really northern pond. And ordinarily, a pond like this shouldn't get algae because they're so far north that they've only got about 35 productive days for enough sunlight to really get algaic activity going for, like I said, for about 35 days. So given water temperature, they shouldn't have algaic activity, but that's a south-facing wall. And that south-facing wall is creating the perfect environment. So you have intense sunlight for 35 days, you were talking about 18, 20 hours. Then you've got the south-facing wall that is absorbing all of that heat and putting it into the water in a very short area. And then, of course, you've got nutrients in the pond. So the only place you're seeing the algae spawn is along the south-facing wall. So it'll grow anywhere as long as it's got those three ingredients. And light. Light is probably, well, I won't say it's number one, but light is one that you can control to a certain extent. That light will penetrate to 8 feet or more, depending on your water quality. So if you can get 8 feet of light penetration, that means your 8 feet of water column is productive for algae weeds, algae growth, and aquatic weeds. And if the entire water column is productive, then that's where issues start. Once algae starts to form, you have what we refer to as nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling is, well, it's exactly what you think it is. Algae survives for about 2 weeks. It can reproduce as often as every 20 minutes, depending on the strain. But after its 2-week, 14-day life cycle, the algae that's there dies, falls to the bottom, adds to the sludge layer, which is more vegetative matter in the bottom of the pond, which is the nutrients that you're trying to avoid. So you end up in that nutrient cycling. And over a period of time, you build up sludge. That is a sludge core. Actually, I lied, that one is from Ontario. That's not that is an Ontario core. And that is 38 inches. Honestly, because the sludge was so loose, I'd say that sludge layer was probably closer to 45, 46 inches deep. And that's what you end up with, is that sludge capacity. And you have Leonard Skinner's worst album, which is just the vicious cycle of algae death, algae death, algae death, and that sludge layer starts to build up. And your pond looks like that. And the next bloom looks worse, and the next bloom looks worse. And that leads to something called eutrophication. Eutrophication is simply your loss of capacity. As that sludge layer builds, you lose water holding capacity. On top of adding nutrients, which makes your pond and your water source difficult to manage because the chemistry is changing, you're also losing capacity. We've had a number of instances, particularly where we are and right across this country. Every last one of us can think of a drought year. And we've had instances where some of those ponds have run dry, and it's not necessary. Certainly, eutrophication minimizes or reduces your water holding capacity. That's what it does. And sediment can build quickly, 1 to 5 inches a year, which may not sound like much, but you extrapolate that 10, 30, 50 years, and you can see how that buildup of sludge is going to take what is a pristine and productive and useful pond and turn it into something that's less so. So that's what we're shooting for. And for many people, probably doesn't look that bad, but it's bad. So couple of the signs and symptoms. When you've got issues, what does that algae look like? Well, really, there's two predominant forms. Planktonic algae is the first one. Planktonic algae is a single-celled plant. That is, the pea soup is what a lot of people will say, and the water itself is opaque, and it's a green, or it can be green right the way through brown. And that's planktonic algae. It's a little tougher to deal with. That too is planktonic. Oh, I lied. That one's Ontario as well. That too is planktonic algae. Never seen the blue before, but they actually imported that algae. Their water course was running dry, and they pumped water from a local, from a nearby water course, and sadly imported that. But that's still planktonic algae. The predominance in Ontario, and certainly in most of Canada, is filamentous algae. Filamentous or string algae. That's the stuff most people are familiar with. It's the long, stringy stuff. You know, and it smells really bad. The key things about filamentous algae is number one, it grows on structure. So rocks, roots, stumps, branches, junk in the water, it needs that physical structure in which to initiate its growth. And it grows on that structure. If you're looking into your pond and you're seeing hairy rocks, and you're seeing you know, stumps covered in fur, that's filamentous algae starting its growth cycle. And then when it gets big enough, the flotation cells bust it loose, it floats to the surface, and that's when it actively goes to work. And as a photosynthesizer, it's as efficient as anything on the planet. And it doesn't take much, and it will grow and grow and grow and grow. But again, the important point here is it only grows in waters where sunlight can reach that physical structure, those roots, rocks, stumps, leaves, branches, whatever happens to be in the pond. If sunlight can't reach it, then the stuff can't grow. Filamentous algae, as an aside, creates an ideal environment for mosquitoes and insects, predominantly because that filamentous algae forming a mat stagnates the surface of the water. And mosquito larvae and most of the other insect larvae are actually right at the surface of the water, breathing through little tiny tubes, and which is why if we can disturb the surface of the water, we can get rid of a lot of the mosquito problem. But filamentous algae, again, supports that environment by stagnating the water and making it easier for those larvae to survive. So that's filamentous algae. And as I said, that's the stringy stuff, the gooey stuff, and it can get that bad. That is filamentous algae as well. So our contention, and in our work with Alter, we purport that healthy water means healthy turf. If you have an understanding of your water, if you know what's going on in it, and you can ensure that what you're delivering to your turf is healthy water, then you're going to get healthy turf out of it. Or, you know, at least water's not going to be the problem. So now you know what the problem is. What are you going to do with it? There are all manner of toys and trinkets and products and potions and sauces, and we deal a lot with the Hutterites out west, and their favorite phrase is foo-foo dust. There's all sorts of things that you can throw at this pond. We're going to explore your various options broken down in a couple of different categories. But first and foremost, you can rake it if you want. That is not an Ontario golf course. That is a British Columbia golf course. They actually decided to address the issue by draining the pond and vacuuming the sludge off the bottom of the pond. And I am here to tell you two things. The smell coming out of there is absolutely horrendous, and that guy had the worst job on the planet for about 2 weeks. I don't know what that guy's doing, but everybody's got their idea of how to treat a pond and how to go after some of those nutrients. I will tell you right here and now, if you do nothing else, in my estimation, if you do nothing else, if you can afford nothing else, if nothing else makes sense to you, dye your pond. Dye, 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 dye. If dye is cheap, it's easy to use, it's absolutely environmentally responsible. Any of the good dyes that you're using are at least 98 to 99% food grade dye with 1 or 2 other dispersal agents in them, but they're all fairly much the same. But the single best thing you can do for your pond is dye. Why? A couple of reasons. Well, first of all, oh yeah, that's black. Black dye creates a reflection on the surface, very strong reflection, as you can see. It stops sunlight penetration. All dyes do. That's the intent. And if you can stop the sunlight from penetrating, then you can stop the algae from propagating. You can prevent the algae from reaching those rock sticks, stumps, leaves, branches. So it's your first line of defense. Some superintendents will tell you that they'll dye the pond, especially with a black, because it creates a very strong reflection. It minimizes the number of people who fish golf balls because they can't see them. So in theory, it would speed up play, but that's black. That's blue. Pond dye. It is prefer a solid over a liquid. Liquids are hard to keep in suspension. The powders work really, really well as long as you've got them in a good dispersal, a good water soluble package. Pond dye. So other than pond dye, moving on from the very basic, I'm going to break these down into really three categories: chemical, biological, and mechanical. You could just as easily break them down into cosmetic, remediation, and I don't know, replicate. Anyway, 3 ways to treat chemicals. By and large, we're talking about poisons. And as soon as we start talking about chemicals, those people who've been in the industry for a period of time, their minds all go to copper sulfate or copper. Really cheap, readily available. You can buy it in virtually any garden store as a treatment to make your blood good Japanese maples redder by adding copper sulfate to the soil around it. It's also illegal for a number of reasons. But here's what I feel I need to address copper, so we're just going to cover it quickly. First of all, it's a really, really, really crummy pond treatment because it then descends very quickly through the water column, so it has really short-term effectiveness. Essentially, copper sulfate drops through the water, whatever's present, it's going to attract and kill. That's it. Copper sulfate's a metal, it never breaks down. Once you throw it into the pond, you now have your pond plus copper. The more someone throws into a water body, the more copper it's going to build up. It is a poison. It is toxic to humans, it is toxic to animals, fish, amphibians, turtles, your dog, everybody. Copper sulfate does result in copper buildup if you have continued use, and we've seen this in a couple of farm applications where people just, every year just throw some copper sulfate. Well, now they've got sterile sludge. They have no beneficial bacteria. That pond's never coming back, and they've got copper buildup in their sludge, which incidentally you can't get rid of. Pumping sludge off the bottom of a pond needs to go somewhere, and it can't leave your property, certainly not in this country. Copper sulfate will contribute to blooms. Yeah, you kill what's in the water, and then you take it and you send it to the bottom, and it sits on the bottom. You've added more organic material to the pond, which means there's more opportunity for the next bloom to be worse. And it is a hazardous product. It's a dust particle, and it's hazardous to breathe. So that's copper. I just, stay away from it. If you choose to go aside, be very, very careful. Make sure you're picking something that's going to address the problem you're after. Make sure you read the label thoroughly. For the benefit of all of your fish and crayfish and amphibians and salamanders and your dog and everybody else, try to spot treat as much as you can. or only treat very specific areas, up to no more than 25% of the pond at a given time. That gives the aquatic life a chance to rebound and move. Not going to talk about licensing. You can investigate that for yourself because it is a convoluted mess. Asides are a short term. They're a cosmetic fix. They don't solve the problem. They solve they'll kill what's on the surface. They'll get rid of your algae. They'll get rid of your bulrushes. They'll get rid of the rest of it. But it doesn't solve the underlying problem. It doesn't make your water quality any better. And there have been instances where algae become resistant. So in the same category, but really not the same product, I would add a new breed of products called phosphorus binders. There's a couple really good ones out there. Alturf has one. And phosphorus binders are mixed with liquid and then sprayed across the surface of the pond. The active ingredient, well, there's really, the thing that's in it that we care about is zeolite. And zeolite's a volcanic mineral. Zeolite, however, naturally floats. So the product has an iron isolate in it to give it a little bit of weight. It'll descend through the water column, and as it descends through the water column, zeolite attracts and binds phosphorus. That's what it does. And it'll bring that phosphorus in. There are a couple of others out there, but phosphorus binders are worth a look. Again, they are not remedial, they are cosmetic. But if you've had a problem in the past and your pond has had issues in previous years, you might want to consider a phosphorus binder because it'll give the other products you're using a chance to really get a foothold and get going, because by binding the phosphorus, we're taking one of the essential nutrients that algae needs out of the water column, rendering it unavailable for the plant and giving the other products a chance to get going. So biological, that's chemical, biological. There are all kinds of biological products out there. Again, Alturf has what we believe are the best. They are bacteria and enzyme products. They're sold as liquids or solids, and they need to be applied at regular intervals. Couple of notes. Biologicals that are liquids, we tend to stay away from because live liquids are dying as soon as you put them in the container, and their shelf life is limited. But even if their shelf life, even if you see a shelf life that's 12 months, the efficacy of that product is constantly declining because as a live liquid, it simply can't sustain. A dried bacteria, better way to go. Shelf life is almost infinite, and you're assured you have a guaranteed potency as soon as it becomes active in the water. One of the really nice things, or the nice things about biologicals, is they're not there to kill anything. They are there simply to take booster cables to your pond. They're there to work with the existing flora and boost that existing bacteria while adding billions and billions of microbes themselves to not kill anything, but outcompete those toxic algae for food. So they'll eat them, but they'll eat the same thing algae eats, but they eat about 600 times the rate, thereby outcompeting. And then if you do have algae present and it dies, then the bacteria and enzymes will eat those too. They're grass isolates, grass generally recognized as safe. Canada has a grass isolates list, and if you're going to use a bacterial product, make sure it's on the grass isolates list, which is available from us, or we'll make sure Alturf has it. And in fact, what you're doing with biologicals is enhancing the pond health, not hurting it. You're not adding anything negative. Some of the added benefits: you get rid of those algae mats, you'll reduce your mosquito concentrations. Moving water with less organic material in it and less sludge eliminates odors, and you're reducing weeds. Now, reducing weeds over time is important here. As you take the sludge layer down, the ability of your rooted weeds to gain nutrients is diminished, but it's not eliminated. So bulrushes, that really nice tuber we were talking about, those bulrushes are never going to recede. They're going to stop, the encroachment will stop, but getting them to recede is a completely different thing, and biologicals won't accomplish that. But they will stop the intrusion as they run down the nutrient load. Maintain containment performance, which is just a fancy way of saying you stop the eutrophication, you in fact reduce it by reducing the sludge layer, and you get your capacity back. Since we're talking about biologicals, barley straw is very popular, so let's have a word about barley straw. Seen this? People throwing barley straw in the pond. Yes, it is true. The barley straw, and it actually has to be barley straw, it cannot simply be straw, it has to be specifically barley straw, does have an enzyme in it that's very similar to the enzymes in the live liquids that will outcompete algae for food. The problem is that in a bale of barley straw, you have more organic material than you do enzymes required to break them down. So if you throw a bale of straw in the pond, you're actually adding more organic material than you're getting benefit for. Plus, if the bale breaks, you got a whole mess of problems. So that's biologicals in a nutshell. There are programs available. Generally, a good biological you're throwing once a month, and they're all based on volume. Now, mechanical. A lot of people like to go to mechanical because it tends to be a capital investment versus an operating cost investment. They prefer a one-time thing. So we'll look at various mechanicals. That is the simplest mechanical out there, and that is the job you give to the person who has irritated you the most on your crew, because it is wet, it is sloppy, it smells really, really bad, and you'd be amazed how heavy algae can be. But throwing a rake in the pond and pulling the algae off is absolutely mechanical. Doesn't really accomplish much. This is also mechanical. This is a system that we toyed with, I'm going to say 10 years ago. We briefly called it skimmer tech, and we developed a system for pulling duckweed off the surface of the pond. That little unit sat in the pond and just pulled in water, and with it came the duckweed, and it ran through a couple of filters, and it was really successful. It worked very well at sucking in and storing duckweed. The problem is that as well as that product worked, duckweed is 10 times more efficient than that in its production, because duckweed is a proper plant. It has a leaf, it has little roots, and it photosynthesizes like nobody's business, and it propagates like nobody's business. So a week after pulling off 9 of those trailer loads from one pond, the pond covered again. So mechanical mitigation or mechanical treatment needs to be deeper than that, pun intended. When we talk about mechanical, we talk about the addition of oxygen into the water column. Oxygen oxidizer that's exactly what it does. By adding oxygen to the water column, you're adding an element that will oxidize the organics throughout your water column and oxidize or break down the elements in your sludge layer. So the more oxygen or air you can introduce into your water column, the healthier the pond is going to be. It is a long-term investment. Fortunately, it's a one-time investment ordinarily with mechanicals, but it is a long-term proposition where chemicals are instant. Oh yeah, that's the other thing about chemicals. If somebody throws something in your pond and says, I don't know, I'm not even gonna put it that way. If something goes in your pond and your pond's clean and clear in 3 to 7 days, it was chemical and it's probably copper. Biologicals, chemicals are instant, but the problem comes back. Biologicals are longer term. They'll attack the problem, take some time to generate results because they're biologicals. Mechanical takes even longer. In most instances, if people are looking for mechanical remediation of the pond by introducing oxygen into the water column, we're advising them, you know what, give it the season. It won't take that long. Generally 45, 60 days, you start to see some results. But if you give people the expectation that you know, this is going to take 90 to 120, then that's a little more realistic. But oxygen is what we're after in the water column. And there are a bunch of ways to go after that. Surface aeration might be the most cost effective. It's not the most efficient, but it might be the most cost effective. And a surface aerator is just that. It's a fountain that doesn't look pretty. It just boils. The more white water you see, the better off you are, because white water is water with air in it. So that's what we're trying to achieve, is that boil and bubble and burn. The issue with surface aeration is it works very well in shallow ponds. Doesn't work terribly well. It's less effective in deep ponds. If you're over 10 feet, you might want to look at something other than surface aeration, because it's very difficult for that surface aerator, which is just a motor hanging in the water, to pull the water off the bottom of the pond, to pull anything off the bottom of the pond. It's going to churn the surface, it's going to give you oxygen, but it's difficult to get it at depth. And to be clear, that is not a surface aerator. That is a fountain. It's pretty. Surface aerators are not pretty. They are just churning away at the water. Subsurface aeration is our absolute go-to virtually 100% of the time. If you want to go mechanical, we recommend subsurface. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the investment is slightly more than a surface aerator. The mechanicals are very straightforward. The unit that goes in the pond will probably outlast me, if not you. And then the compressor itself is a serviceable item, and it's usually serviceable by the golf course or by the owner. But subsurface aeration, on top of its efficiency, its financial efficiency, is really, really efficient at putting oxygen into that water column. You can see the column of air rising through the water. Well, the two things that really matter about aeration, about subsurface aeration, are time on task. So how long is the water bubble in the water, and how small is the bubble? The longer it's in the water, the better opportunity we have for gas exchange. The longer it's there, the more likely oxygen is to enter the water around it. And second of all, the smaller the surface, the smaller the bubble, the more surface area you have per liter of air. But more importantly, again, if you look at that column of air rising, you can see what we call the zone of influence, because that column may only be 22, 24 inches across. But look at how much water it's actually moving. And it's moving that water from the very bottom of the pond right up to the surface. So it's grabbing water. So the pond doesn't look like, if your pond looks like this, and this is an exaggeration, obviously, but ponds and any other water body, lakes, they all stagnate, particularly in the summer, particularly in the heat. You get warmer water that rises, you get colder water that sinks. Anybody who dove into a pond on a hot summer day is very familiar with the thermocline. The thermocline is that line between the nice warm water on top and the distinctly colder water on the bottom. Well, the thermocline isn't just, uncomfortable when you go diving into the pond, but it actually creates a barrier between the cold water on the top, cold water on the bottom, and the warm water on the top, and it prevents an intermixing. So the cold water, the water that's down below, doesn't get a chance to oxygenate because it doesn't get near the surface, and there is no overturn. So that's what we're trying to achieve by aerating the water. So when we put the aerator in the pond, we're getting again, that zone of influence. It's not just the bubbles rising, but it's the water that it's pulling with it. So it's pulling water from the bottom and pushing it all the way up the surface, carrying it in that column of air. And as it reaches the surface, if it hasn't received gas or oxygen in its rise to the surface, now it's on the surface, you've got some boil going, there's the opportunity for gas exchange and oxygen to enter that that anaerobic water now, or once it's on the surface. And then again, as you see those circles, that water just keeps turning over and turning over and turning over. And what you end up with is a uniform distribution of oxygen throughout the water column. And then the more oxygen, as we said, the more oxidation or the more breakdown we get. Aerobic is what we're shooting for, water full of oxygen. Anaerobic is what we're fighting, which is water without oxygen. And simply by putting oxygen into the water column, you're going to oxidize those organics and start to reduce the muck layer and start to reduce the sludge layer. Oh yeah, the thing about bubbles. It's hard to visualize, but it's absolutely true. For those people in Canada, I've learned that this is not a good analogy to give in the United States. For those people in Canada, you take a bag of milk. People in the States say, bag of milk? Anyway, you take a bag of milk, and a plastic bag of milk is 1 liter. 1 liter of milk has a certain amount of surface area. You can probably envision that. If you take that same liter of milk and you break it up amongst 100 little bags, what you've done is created 10x more surface area. So 1 liter of milk has a given surface area, but one 100th of a liter of milk, you've got 10 times the amount of surface area. It's the same with air bubbles. The smaller the bubble, the more surface area you have, the more opportunity for gas exchange you have. So small bubble, better. The longer it's in the water column, best. So again, to recap, the things that we are concerned about when you're looking at your pond are the pH, the organic material, including the minerals. The minerals lead to the hardness, and we're talking about iron, and the nutrients. As long as you test, it seems like a big deal, and it seems like an insurmountable problem, but it's really not. If you understand your pH, if you can define the nutrients that are in the pond itself, if you have an understanding of your organic material, and that can be taking core samples, that can be taking sludge tests, either having the sludge analyzed or simply measuring its depth, and you understand the water hardness, then you have the tool, you have the information you need, and using either some combination of chemical, biological, mechanical, frankly, I steer away from chemical whenever we can, but biologicals, mechanicals, remediation techniques, you can go from what's on the left to what's on the right. I lied again. That is a pond in Ontario. That's not a golf pond. That's a residential pond. And of course, biologicals, mechanicals, chemicals, they're not responsible for the retaining wall in the back or the beach in the front, but they are 100% responsible for the difference in that water. That was a 3-year project, but all of the algae gone. Again, the homeowner did a lot of the work, but all of that algae is gone. The water's crystal clean and clear and healthy, stocked with fish. Kids swim in it, dogs play in it. It's great. So your keys to success when it comes to pond treatments is going to be test and then make a plan. Make a plan, stick to the plan. It does take some time. And at the absolute minimum, die. Big question a lot of people have is, when should I start treating? And the answer is always now. If you're in Ontario, or if you're in Western Canada or Quebec and everything's frozen solid, now's a really good time to start planning. All the people at Alturf are up to speed on the products that are available to you, and they can help you. And of course, we're available to you as well. This is just, I love this quote because it's how most people attack their pond. There's another one that says, next year I'll be better, or next year it'll be better. But there is no need to keep combating it. There is no need to listen to people constantly talking about how bad the ponds look. There is hope. So, questions?
That's terrific, Dave. Just a very comprehensive, excellent presentation. Very well appreciated. We do have some questions for you. I think the most critical one was, who was driving the golf cart that was in the pond? Was that you or Jesse? You didn't slide that by too quickly.
I don't know. That one was actually sent to us. I know that one's been on the internet, but somebody sent that one to us and claimed that it was from a golf course in Raleigh, Carolina, or South Carolina.
Plausible deniability.
So, yeah.
You did cover the mechanical removal, but just in a nutshell, if somebody was to do some mechanical removal on the filamentous algae before they start their treatments, would that provide some benefit to fast tracking the results, or are you going to cause more problems than good?
You're not going to cause more problems, but it's almost a self-defeating exercise. It is truly an ignorant job, and I cannot overstress that. Also, with the technology that we have, which is rakes with floats on it, there's a lot of breaking up of the algae that happens, and as soon as you break it, those each become little propagating entities. So, I mean, I've done it. And I've done it on a prominent golf course in Ontario 2 days before their member guest tournament because it had to be done. So in the short term, yeah, it will give you some relief, but it must be followed up immediately with some sort of mitigation program.
And obviously multifaceted from your presentation.
Yeah.
What about the dye color? I mean, other than aesthetics, is there one that you think does a better job than the other? We deal with blues and blacks, of course, and is there a preference?
Believe it or not, the best results we've ever seen is somebody who mixed blue and black 50-50. That's not a dye that we have, but a mixed dye. Black is really, really, if you have to choose one, black gives you the best results. It gives you that hard reflection, and it is more likely to block sunlight penetration to a greater or at a shorter depth. Most people comes down to aesthetics. They look at the blue and they say it looks too synthetic. But the black makes ponds look deep. But yeah, the best results we've ever seen are a 50-50 blend, but if I had to pick one, I'd say black.
Perfect. Had a fellow, I assumed it was a fellow, had a reservoir. They've got over 200 parts per million bicarbonates in the water. It's being fed by a river. So there's something they can't control that inflow. It's a constant problem. Any thoughts on something that would help him out?
Wow.
Next question, please.
You know what? Not something we run across, but it's oxygen has got to be your first line of defense there, and a lot of it. I'd be looking at an aeration program, probably twice the air per cubic meter as anybody else we've dealt with, and then I'd really want to see a sludge test. I'd want to take a look at that because there are products that will help bind that. They're permitted products. In other words, you need a permit to apply them. But I'd want to see a sludge test to know for sure. But right off the top of my head, aeration.
On the top of aeration, and in general terms too, give the listeners a little idea of how many of those subsurface aerators you would need, depending on the size of the pond. Is one enough for most ponds? Do they have to put in 3, 4, 5, 6? What would be a general rule of thumb?
Well, since you've opened the door, I will walk right through it. This all comes down to a lot of people worry about aerators per how many aerators do I need? It's really about oxygen content and about how much oxygen can we put into the pond. The number you put in the pond is more based on shape than it is based on volume. A long, narrow pond, you're going to want multiple aerators because the water obviously is moving vertically and less horizontally. In a round pond, if you had a kettle-shaped pond, even if you said that kettle-shaped pond is 3/4 an acre, you could put one aerator in the middle at the bottom, and you get the results you're looking for. However, having said that, it's all about oxygen delivery from the compressor. And it would be hard to estimate on a cubic meter basis, but in general, half-acre pond that's 12 feet deep on average, I'd like to see 3 or 4 diffusers, just as a rule of thumb, because that gives you good, regardless of shape, because that gives you really good dispersal.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you for your talk, David. Very well done and very informative. If there's any further questions, the Alterf staff will be happy to help out anybody that's got questions. They can forward them to our rep or our office, and we can engage with David to get you those answers.